What is philosophy? It is a story of humanity's struggles, conflicts, delusions, and curiosity. Consider this: the ideas you take for granted, might they have been planted in you without your knowledge? The world you see, which you accept as real, what exactly is it? Or, wait, does it even exist? How is it different from a world in a dream? And, by the way, why do we even need countries? If we think deeply about it, isn't a country nothing more than an illusion? An astronaut, upon viewing Earth from space, uttered these words, "I couldn't see any national borders from up there." If that's true, why do we fight each other? Why are countries at war, and why are people in constant conflict with each other? What about capitalism? Why do adults go to work every day? What exactly is this thing we call society? When you reflect a little, doesn't everything seem like a mystery? In fact, this world is filled with incomprehensible things. You might think science or academia can resolve these mysteries. However, each one of these fields is actually just an offshoot of philosophy. Science only knows a small part of things. The more recent science becomes, the more it reveals just how little we truly know. Why is it that, while the world offers us an immensely interesting game filled with mysteries, people ignore it, instead complaining that life is boring? Isn't that itself one of the greatest mysteries? Throughout history, people, geniuses, eccentrics, religious leaders, reclusive thinkers, people of profound wisdom, have entrusted their thoughts to future generations, and these ideas have been inherited, developed, and continuously refined. Philosophy, in fact, is a monumental structure of human knowledge, a giant born from human imagination. This story of humanity's accumulated wisdom now begins. If you make it to the end of this journey, I guarantee you'll be in a different world. What kind of world that will be depends on what you know and have experienced up until now. The fact that you clicked on this long video likely means that, deep down, you feel some kind of doubt about the world. Some of your doubts may be resolved, and they will likely evolve into higher-level questions. After all, ancient thinkers faced similar struggles, finding answers to some questions and passing down fragments of their conclusions, only for others to take up where they left off. Now, this baton is being handed to you. Your own insights will add color to it, and it will be passed on to the next generation. That is the journey you are about to embark on. From here on, your emotions will sway, your fixed ideas will shatter, and your assumptions will be overturned. If you're not ready to experience this, I recommend stopping the video here. To those who remain, I imagine your resolve is already firm. I encourage you to examine not just the words of the thinkers who appear but to consider what they truly meant, what lies beneath the surface. If you feel any doubt or indescribable thoughts arise, treasure them. This video is quite long, so feel free to pause it and come back, even if it takes multiple sittings to reach the end. If you manage to finish it in one go, I commend you as something of a superhuman. Now, let us begin our story. We find ourselves in Ionia, in ancient Greece. From a high vantage point, one could see the vast Mediterranean Sea, stretching as far as the eye could see, reflecting the blue of the sky. On the distant horizon, the boundary between sea and sky is indistinct, blending together. Back then, the extent of the world was unknown. People didn't know whether the earth ended somewhere or if land stretched beyond the sea. Humanity was at the mercy of nature, the bounty it provided, the great floods that could sweep away people and homes alike. But after such floods, rich blessings would descend upon the land. The sea could rage like the wrath of a god, or be as serene and beautiful as paradise. What would you feel if you were there, standing in such a place? You might sense that humans are as small as grains of sand, tossed in the vastness of the universe. You might feel that this world is governed by a divine, unknowable force. In ancient times, people revered these overwhelming forces as gods and devoted themselves to them. The first to shatter this fixed notion were the people of Ionia. Ionia, located on the eastern fringe of ancient Greece, was a crossroads between the Greek Empire and the nations of the East. Goods and knowledge brought from faraway lands crossed Asia to reach Ionia, where they were loaded onto ships and transported across the Mediterranean to the central cities of Greece. And so, the people of Ionia became aware of something. Each region had its own distinct gods, beliefs, and myths. The stories they themselves held as absolute truths were entirely different in other lands. Freed from the spell of myth, they were now unbound by its illusions. And with that, a question arose: if the world is not governed by gods, then what governs it? What, then, is the nature of the awe-inspiring natural world? Thus began a quest that was, perhaps, the first philosophical inquiry in human history. The first to ask this question was Thales. His answer was that the origin of all things is water. Water, he believed, is the foundation and end of all existence. Why water? Remember that we are in Ionia, where the sea stretched endlessly before them. Plants grow through water, humans die without water, water corrodes iron and even erodes rocks. Water permeates everything, nurturing life and, at times, destroying it. Thales saw this truth. In observing the world, he saw a cycle. In spring, buds and flowers bloom. In summer, they grow lush. In autumn, they wither. And in winter, the greenery fades away. Come spring, life renews itself. Humans and animals, too, are born, grow, age, and die. New life is born and grows to take their place. All things change, die, and are reborn. The cycle repeats endlessly. Thales felt that behind this ever-changing world lay something transcendent, something beyond the cycle of death and rebirth. Thus began the search for the underlying principle of all things. Anaximenes thought that the source of all things was air, as he observed how the flow of air seemed to mirror the circulation of life itself. The Pythagoreans believed that numbers were the fundamental principle. For them, harmony and order were evident in musical scales and the celestial movements of the stars. Then, on the western coast of Italy, a school of thought arose that dared to challenge religious beliefs, any and all faiths, and even the idea of reincarnation, the Eleatic school. Their stance was radical: the world is one, with no creation, no destruction, no multiplicity, no movement. Such ideas are merely illusions. What led them to say such things? Their reasoning was simple: what exists, exists; what does not exist, does not. A thing cannot exist and not exist at the same time. Following this logic, they concluded that only a single, eternal principle exists. However, the Eleatic school faced a major problem. No matter how much they argued that what they perceived was mere illusion, the reality of it still demanded explanation. It was another Ionian philosopher, Heraclitus, who would break new ground in this area. Heraclitus took the idea of harmony from the Pythagoreans and the concept of being from the Eleatics and unified them into a new perspective. He asserted that all things flow, a statement that encapsulated his belief that everything is in a state of constant change. You cannot step into the same river twice, he claimed. The flickering of a flame is due to the harmony between creation and extinction. In the same way, struggle is the father of all things and the ruler of all things. In the harmony born from struggle, existence itself is revealed. In this way, Heraclitus proclaimed that the one is many, and the many is one. 2,000 years later, thinkers like Darwin and Nietzsche would revisit these ideas in a new light. Heraclitus had indeed taken a great step forward, but questions still remained: why must there be change in all things? Why does unity give rise to multiplicity? Two more thinkers, Empedocles and Democritus, would go on to address these questions. Empedocles, born in the city of Acragas in Sicily, sought to unify the Eleatics' concept of being with Heraclitus' concept of becoming. He moved away from the idea of a single principle and proposed instead that the world is composed of four eternal elements: Thales water, Anaximenes air, Heraclitus fire, and the Eleatics earth. These four elements are brought together by the force of love and separated by the force of strife. All things, he argued, arise from the mixing and separating of these four eternal elements. Meanwhile, the atomists, Leucippus and Democritus, sought a different answer to the same question. They proposed that the world consists of indivisible particles, or atoms, that move through the void. They explained that no being arises by mere chance; everything follows the law of necessity. This idea would later align with the Pythagorean concept of order and lead, nearly 2,000 years later, to the works of Newton and the foundation of modern physics. The insights of Thales, Anaximenes, the Pythagoreans, Empedocles, and Democritus were, remarkably, confined to the regional cities of Ionia. In Athens, the central city of Greece, People's belief in the gods remained steadfast, and few dared to challenge it. Then Anaxagoras came, bringing philosophy to Athens at great personal risk. He denied the gods worshipped in Athens, and though he eventually had to flee under a death sentence for blasphemy, he left a lasting mark on the city's intellectual life. Anaxagoras recognized that the world could not be explained by random forces like love or strife, nor by particles moving of their own accord. He argued that a higher force must exist, a thinking, mental force capable of purposefully shaping the world. And so, philosophy's oldest thinkers began a new journey with Anaxagoras. The next setting for philosophy would be in Athens, but it wasn't an entirely welcoming one. Ancient Greece was a democracy, where politicians were chosen by popular vote and led the state. This was a remarkable system for its time, making Greece as advanced as any modern nation. But democracy brought its own problems. Much like today's society, most people voted based on mood and trends rather than critical thought. Those skilled in rhetoric gained favor over those who earnestly sought truth. These politicians learned that skill in debate and the ability to sway public opinion were more valuable than knowledge itself. This need led to the rise of the sophists. They argued that everything, including morals and beliefs, was relative. Man is the measure of all things. Their stance held that truth and virtue were not absolutes, they varied depending on the individual. Initially, this theory was a matter of philosophy, but it soon spread into ethics and society. What this meant was that concepts like justice, morality, faith, law, and righteousness became subject to personal interpretation. And the effect on society was clear: might became right. This is one of the reasons philosophy remains essential today. The complexities of the human spirit and mind cannot be fully explained by science, nor can we disregard their exploration. Otherwise, we risk returning to an era where pure power is the only law. Today, academia disallows simplistic relativism in scholarly fields, as it stifles intellectual inquiry. However, the idea of diversity is itself a form of relativism, is it not? To understand why modern society promotes diversity, which risks encouraging such relativism, we must examine the origins of modern philosophy. For now, let us return to ancient Greece, where sophist relativism was leading to a collapse of intellectual integrity. In the midst of this decline, a savior emerged, the greatest debater of all time, Socrates. Socrates raised his voice in warning to every Greek citizen, every politician, and indeed all future philosophers: are you falling into intellectual decay? Socrates devoted his life to challenging people's beliefs, often at the cost of his own well-being. He relentlessly pursued truth and refused to settle for shallow answers. Eventually, his commitment to integrity led to his trial and execution. Socrates' unyielding devotion to knowledge laid the foundation for philosophy. Socrates' influence inspired young Athenians, leading to the rise of two of the most formidable minds in history, Plato and Aristotle, whose impact is so profound that their ideas permeate modern thinking. The first of these, Plato, was born in Athens in 427 BCE, during the Peloponnesian War, a conflict that pitted democracy against anti-democratic forces. Growing up amid this struggle, young Athenians were encouraged to envision futures as politicians and leaders. Plato was no exception. Yet his true calling was philosophy, thanks to Socrates' teachings. Socrates' death sentence in 399 BCE was a turning point for Plato. In Plato's words, our friend Socrates was brought to trial by those who lacked reverence for God and condemned to death for godlessness, a crime he least deserved. At that moment, Plato resolved to eradicate this kind of injustice from the world. Plato's determination went far beyond the power struggles of his day. He sought to revolutionize the state itself. Combining philosophy and politics, Plato aimed to reshape human life and nature, creating a new philosophy centered on his theory of forms. To explain this, let us consider the two pillars of Socratic philosophy. In his final days, Socrates expressed his philosophy in a single phrase: you concern yourself only with wealth, reputation, and honor. But aren't you ashamed of being so unconcerned about truth and the soul? Socrates saw two things: the pursuit of truth and the improvement of the soul. Thus, Socratic philosophy was built on these two pillars, never assuming you know and striving to be a better person. But Plato went beyond Socrates, forging a new path that would profoundly impact Western thought. His search for truth led him to the theory of forms, where he argued that concepts like beauty, justice, and virtue have an ultimate, transcendent form beyond the material world. Imagine you encounter something beautiful, a face, a body, a flower, a natural scene, or an artwork. Each of these examples represents beauty, but they're not beauty itself. True beauty must transcend individual instances, as each is merely an imperfect reflection. This ultimate beauty is the form of beauty. Likewise, every concept has its ultimate form, transcending worldly examples. This realization allowed Plato to elevate Socratic thought, suggesting that improving the soul meant getting closer to these ultimate forms. To explain this, Plato used a famous allegory, the allegory of the cave. Imagine yourself chained in a dark cave, with shadows cast on the wall by figures moving behind you. Since birth, you've only seen shadows, so you take them for reality. One day, you're unchained and brought outside. At first, the sunlight blinds you, but gradually, you see the true world, filled with vibrant colors and boundless skies. And when you gaze upon the sun itself, the source of light, everything finally makes sense. In this allegory, the sun represents the form of the good, the shadows are the illusions we mistake for reality, and most people are like those chained in the cave, never knowing the world beyond. If you follow Plato's thought thus far, it's as though the chains have been removed, and you're seeing beyond the cave. Let's return to Socrates' words, you concern yourself only with wealth, reputation, and honor. But aren't you ashamed of being so unconcerned about truth and the soul? Plato's answer was to educate society by guiding people toward the forms. He created the academy, which became a model for modern education. But does our current education system truly follow Plato's ideals? Is the emphasis on exams and rote learning aligned with the pursuit of wisdom? Now, the academy produced countless great minds, but one student would challenge Plato's very foundation. This student was Aristotle, who would later be called the father of all knowledge. Aristotle rejected the theory of forms, believing Plato had neglected to ground his ideas in the physical world. Aristotle took a more grounded approach, using empirical observations to classify knowledge. He founded logic, natural science, biology, ethics, aesthetics, and metaphysics. However, Aristotle's influence would later stifle innovation for nearly 1,000 years, as his theories became revered and dogmatically followed. It's important to note that both Plato and Aristotle explained the world by placing an external, supernatural principle beyond nature. For Plato, the natural world reflected the forms, and nature itself was secondary. For Aristotle, the forms were embedded within nature, yet still connected to an external divine principle. Alexander the Great, who studied under Aristotle, expanded the Greek Empire, bringing Greek philosophy to the world. As Rome took over, Greek thought merged with Roman values, and ethical philosophy gained prominence over natural philosophy. By the end of antiquity, Christianity began spreading within the Roman Empire. Amidst severe persecution, Christianity eventually became Rome's state religion. Yet many Romans were highly educated in Greek thought, making it difficult to spread the Christian message. The church was clever. They integrated Greek philosophy into their teachings. Augustine incorporated Plato's ideas into Christian doctrine, linking the forms to God's creation. However, as the church gained power, it needed a doctrine that justified its rule over society. Thomas Aquinas restructured Christian doctrine using Aristotle's ideas. According to Aquinas, the divine principle wasn't separate but inherent in the material world, which allowed the church to claim political authority in the name of God. This model worked for centuries, but as the church grew more corrupt, contact with Islamic philosophy through the Crusades brought fresh perspectives to Europe. Ironically, ancient Greek philosophy, forgotten in Europe, had been preserved and expanded upon in the Islamic world. This knowledge returned to Europe with new insights. The devastating Black Death, which killed a third of Europe's population, also led people to question God's role. Imagine, no matter how devout one was, friends and family fell one by one. Belief in God began to wane. Francis Bacon criticized philosophy's focus on morality and theology, arguing that philosophy should serve human life. The Renaissance marked a shift toward empiricism and practical study, challenging the Church's authority. Thinkers like Kepler and Galileo, by quantifying natural laws, paved the way for the scientific revolution. Galileo declared that nature is written in the language of mathematics. However, the rise of science posed a new question: how could mathematics, a human invention, so precisely describe the natural world? People of the time thought like this: nature is something that humans perceive through senses and experience. For example, we know that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west every day because we experience it daily. We understand that the planets of the solar system orbit the sun because we have observed it by looking up at the night sky and through telescopic observations. On the other hand, mathematical concepts, like numbers, infinitely long lines, or perfect triangles, are not given to us through experience. In fact, no one has ever seen a perfect triangle or an infinitely long line. They are purely imaginary concepts. From this, one can only conclude that the ways of thinking in mathematical concepts are inherent in humans from the start. Thus, it becomes far from obvious that we can apply mathematics, a product of human imagination, to the nature that is given to us through sensory experience. Think about it, doesn't this apply to you as well? GPS, for instance, relies on the theory of relativity, and devices that run on electricity utilize electromagnetism and quantum mechanics, all of which are described by mathematics. And based on mathematically derived results, we calculate positions, for example. Yet, the actual locations in the real world and the calculated results based on human imagined mathematics consistently match. This makes one wonder if human cognitive abilities have some special power. Either way, our curiosity doesn't allow us to leave unexplained why the world can be described by mathematics. It was Descartes who took on the challenge of this question, making a groundbreaking step forward. This question was an immensely difficult one. Where should he even begin? So Descartes thought to start from something truly certain. He decided to tentatively assume that anything with even a hint of doubt, whether it was information, theories, or myths, was false. This approach is famously known as methodical doubt. I encourage you to think about what you can truly consider as truth. Can we not doubt the existence of God, for example? Since there are people who do not believe in God, it is indeed possible to doubt it. Therefore, let's assume God is not true. Then, are the things we see right in front of us real? People sometimes see hallucinations, and optical illusions are also possible. So let's assume this, too, is not certain. What about our own existence in this world? Maybe this world is a virtual one, or maybe it's all a dream. Thus, let's assume our existence in this world, as well as our perceptions, are not certain. And our own thoughts? For example, the idea that 1 + 1 = 2, Descartes doubted even this. If there existed a demon that could disturb human thought, then this, too, could be false. He doubted everything, discarding anything even slightly doubtful. At that point, it might feel as if nothing could be certain anymore. But Descartes realized there was one thing that couldn't be doubted. If he was doubting everything, the very act of doubting meant that he himself existed. Without the self to doubt, there would be no doubt. So, Descartes established the existence of the self who thinks. At this point, you might understand why Descartes famously said, "I think, therefore I am." Since we found an absolute truth, Descartes proposed abandoning all doubts and starting from this truth. This was Descartes' method, naming this pure thinking self as reason. Descartes' reason is something granted by God, and what this pure reason perceives is truth itself, a criterion for truth. In other words, humans possess this God-given reason, and by removing extraneous sensory perceptions, one arrives at the truth. What does it mean to eliminate all extraneous sensory perceptions? For instance, imagine a red apple. What if we remove all sensory and conceptual aspects? The color red is derived from visual sensation, so it's not recognized by pure reason. The concept of an apple itself is abstract, so it, too, is not a recognition through pure reason. However, even if you erase all sensory and conceptual perceptions in this way, the space where the apple existed cannot be erased. Thus, Descartes considered that recognition through pure reason is quantitative in nature, within the space it occupies. Given this, the reason why the world can be described by mathematics becomes evident. If the recognition of objects through pure reason is quantitative, it only makes sense that mathematics, which can express quantitative things, can describe the world. Thus, Descartes provides the basis for why we can describe the world with mathematics. However, Descartes' true greatness lies elsewhere. He made a much larger shift, opening the doors to modern philosophy. Descartes proposed that what exists is what human pure reason perceives. In other words, it is human reason that determines what exists and what does not in this world. At this moment, it was no longer the idea or God that occupied the position governing the universe in a transcendent manner, but human reason itself. Thus, through Descartes, the framework of modern philosophy was formed, with reason as the subject and the objective world perceived by that reason as reality. Following this, exploration divided into idealism that examined the subjective side, and natural science as the exploration of the objective, rational world. The one who sought to clarify the rational world granted by reason was Newton, and with him, physics was born. Some may wonder, Descartes assumes that reason is granted by God, which is why what is recognized by reason is certain. But what if God does not exist? Recall that around this era, the existence of God was increasingly doubted. In such a case, reason becomes unfounded. As the 18th century approached, society began moving away from God. Thus, the need arose to examine reason, now suspended in midair. This led to the split into British empiricism and continental rationalism. The giants of British empiricism include Locke, Hume, and Berkeley. They believed humans are born as blank slates, acquiring knowledge through experience. In other words, everyone is born as a blank slate, and as they grow up, they learn to speak, walk, and acquire knowledge. Though it seems plausible, this view negates the certainty of mathematics and natural science. Experiential knowledge is unlikely to be absolute. For instance, just because the moon shone brightly last night and the night before does not guarantee it will shine tonight, as it could be a new moon. Similarly, while the sun has risen every day since we were born, we cannot say for certain it will rise tomorrow, as it might disappear. If human knowledge relies solely on experiential things, then absolute knowledge is impossible. What, then, is continental rationalism? It's the complete opposite, positing that human reason is certain even without being supported by God. British empiricism holds that all knowledge is experiential, meaning absolute knowledge cannot exist, while continental rationalism asserts that what reason perceives is absolute. Kant unified these seemingly opposing views. Kant did not believe in reason being supported by God but acknowledged that the world could be mathematically described, as demonstrated by Newton. So why does human reason, not supported by God, align with the world's structure? If the world were completely independent of human reason, such a thing would be impossible. For mathematics and natural science to be considered certain knowledge, this world must have been created by our reason itself. Recognition should not depend on the object, rather, the object should depend on recognition. In other words, it is through our recognition that objects appear as they are. This marked a Copernican revolution, similar to the transition from geocentrism to heliocentrism. Kant thought that the object humans perceive is not the thing itself, but rather an object limited by human cognitive ability. Objects stimulate human sensory organs, and reason processes these sensory data to construct the world within our cognitive scope. Even if the world were four-dimensional, humans would only perceive it in 3 dimensions due to cognitive limitations. What we see may look entirely different to beings with other cognitive abilities. Modern neuroscience has confirmed this, but the fact that Kant reached this conclusion through theoretical insight alone in the 18th century is remarkable. Simultaneously, he concluded that humans can only perceive within the bounds of their cognitive abilities, so pondering matters beyond this range is meaningless and unprovable. This realization meant that concepts like Plato's theory of forms or God may be considered, but since they lie beyond human cognitive limits, they are effectively meaningless, as we cannot confirm or recognize them. In a way, can establish the position of these transcendent ideas as something that humans cannot verify and therefore cannot meaningfully discuss. While Kant laid out the limits of human cognition, it doesn't necessarily imply that these limits are fixed. One could naturally think that through training or some process, our cognitive abilities might improve slightly. It was Hegel who challenged the concept of these fixed cognitive limits. He believed that through interacting with the external world, humanity could continually approach the truth of the world. Imagine, for instance, that you take an axe and set out to clear a forest on your own. You need to cut trees and understand the terrain. As you cut down trees, you learn about the hardness and characteristics of the wood. Over time, as you adapt your methods, your knowledge of the forest grows, and so does your self-awareness. This continual process of engaging with and shaping the external world, Hegel argued, would elevate the human spirit toward a deeper self-consciousness. Similarly, Hegel believed that through the interactions between people, society and history would evolve toward an ultimate truth he called the absolute spirit. Looking at history, Hegel observed stages of increasing human freedom, from the era of slavery, where slaves had no freedom, to the feudal system, where serfs enjoyed slightly more rights than slaves. Following that came the age of absolute monarchy, where freedom increased further. Then came the French Revolution, overthrowing monarchies under ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. It's understandable why Hegel, witnessing these events, felt humanity was progressing toward the absolute spirit. In fact, when Napoleon's troops entered his hometown, Hegel saw Napoleon on horseback and was deeply moved. In his own words, "I saw the world spirit on horseback, imposing its will on the city as it rode through the streets." This encapsulates the flow of philosophy up to the beginning of the 19th century. With Hegel, the philosophy that began with Socrates reached its zenith. People believed humanity was advancing toward the absolute spirit, and the future seemed bright. But then came a tragedy. In the 19th and 20th centuries, humanity witnessed horrific events, world wars, massacres, the development of weapons of mass destruction, and the atomic bomb. If war breaks out again, we may well find ourselves back in the Stone Age. The notion that reason would improve the world was utterly denied. Historically, since Plato, the ultimate governing principle of existence had always been transcendent. First, Plato placed the idea at the top, then Christianity placed God, and Descartes replaced it with reason. But all of these have been negated. God is dead. Humanity has lost the ultimate foundation that supported existence. Not only that, even in science and mathematics, assumptions that once seemed unshakable have crumbled. For example, it was long believed that geometric objects were absolute truths innate to human understanding. However, the development of non-Euclidean geometry, which contradicts traditional human perception, came as a shock. At first, it was dismissed as mere theoretical constructs, but Einstein's general theory of relativity demonstrated that non-Euclidean geometry actually described nature. Not only that, relativity also overturned the traditional concepts of time and space. Moreover, quantum mechanics introduced the uncertainty principle, revealing realms where human understanding cannot penetrate. The foundation of everything began to crumble. People had once relied on an absolute rational order, using it to build the foundation of modern European culture. But now, the status of reason, which once reigned supreme, began to decline rapidly. From the time of Plato onward, Western philosophy had assigned supreme value and meaning to an ultimate principle, something that guaranteed the worth of all things. But now, that ultimate principle was dead. all things became devoid of value and meaning. God is dead. In this void, if we do not establish a new set of values, everything will become meaningless. This is the state of modern philosophy. And here, it is the earliest of philosophers, those before Plato, who began to come back into focus. It was Nietzsche who initiated this shift. He sought to diagnose why this collapse of all values had happened. His diagnosis was simple. Ever since Plato, Western philosophy had placed an ultimate governing principle outside the reality of this world. This made all things in nature subordinate to this transcendent principle. Living nature was reduced, stripped of autonomy. However, Nietzsche argued that these ultimate principles were merely human desires. Consequently, everything in existence was, from the start, built upon a foundation of nothingness. This, he believed, was the reason for the collapse of values. To establish new values, Nietzsche sought to revive the concept of a living, dynamic nature, something untouched by transcendent ideals. Nietzsche's declaration that God is dead shook the foundations of Western philosophy. With it, the very idea of absolute truth crumbled, and the 20th century saw a wave of new philosophical thought that wrestled with meaning in an increasingly uncertain world. Thinkers began to explore human existence, subjectivity, and the nature of reality itself, setting the stage for what would become existentialism, phenomenology, and postmodernism. Existentialism, championed by figures like Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus, rejected the notion of predetermined meaning. Instead, it focused on the individual's responsibility to create meaning within an absurd universe. As Camus famously noted, the struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. Simultaneously, phenomenologists like Edmund Husserl and Martin Heidegger questioned how we perceive reality, suggesting that understanding begins with our own subjective experiences. Heidegger's Being in Time delved into the very essence of being, probing questions about existence, mortality, and human freedom in ways that influence countless disciplines. With the rise of postmodernism, philosophers such as Michel Foucault and Jacques Derrida critiqued concepts like power, knowledge, and language, arguing that truth and meaning are constructed by social forces in historical contexts. Foucault, for instance, analyzed how power shapes our understanding of knowledge and identity, while Derrida's deconstructionism challenged the stability of language itself. As the 21st century began, new technological, ethical, and existential dilemmas emerged. With the advent of artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and virtual realities, questions about human identity, autonomy, and morality have intensified. Philosophers now ponder the ethics of AI, the consequences of genetic manipulation, and the limits of digital surveillance. Environmental philosophy has also gained prominence, as thinkers grapple with humanity's relationship with nature in the face of climate change and ecological crises. Modern philosophy continues to explore the themes of selfhood, morality, and meaning in an era of unprecedented change and complexity. Yet the questions that first arose in ancient Greece remain. In a world still full of mystery, philosophy endures as an evolving dialogue, a testament to humanity's unending pursuit of wisdom and understanding. Thus, from the pre-Socratics to postmodernism, and into today's philosophical discourse, the journey continues. Humanity's struggle to grasp truth, meaning, and existence itself carries on, reflecting the enduring power of philosophy to shape and be shaped by each new generation. And so, the story of philosophy, a journey through ages of questions and revelations, continues its ascent. From Thales' first questions about the nature of reality to the existential cries of the 20th century and the technological dilemmas of today, philosophy remains humanity's eternal dialogue with itself and the universe. In our quest to understand, we have faced illusions and boundaries, powers and conflicts. And yet, even as each era raised new challenges, philosophy rose to meet them. Each thinker who took up the torch has added their unique insight, weaving a tapestry that stretches from the depths of the past to the horizons of the future. With each question, humanity's spirit has burned brighter, refusing to rest, daring to confront the unknown. Now, the baton is in our hands. We are heirs to a tradition as vast as time itself, a legacy urging us to question, to dream, and to seek what lies beyond. As we stand at the edge of the unknown, philosophy reminds us that every new question, every spark of doubt, is the beginning of yet another journey. In this endless pursuit, we are connected to those who came before and those who will come after, bound by the same insatiable desire to uncover the mysteries of existence. Let us carry this flame forward, for as long as there are questions to ask and mysteries to explore, the story of philosophy will never end. This journey has only just begun.